Welcome to THA Talks, for free thought and open minds. Hello people, coming to you from London, UK and out to the universe. I'm Paul Obitelli and this is edition 40 of THA Talks, brought to you by Theo Humanist Arts. Here at THA Talks we bring you weekly shows and all the best interviews we can get our sticky mitts on. Just go to www.thatalks.com to listen to or to download all our free content. Our talks include news, conspiracies, spirituality, the occult, science, history, art, philosophy, religion and much more. If you'd like to get hold of us and send us in your thoughts or ideas for the show, maybe a request for a potential guest, you can do so by emailing info@thatalks.com. Also, if you like what we're doing here, you can subscribe to our RSS feed or through various podcast directories like iTunes or Stitcher. You can visit our website for that. Joined here with me today from the other side of London is that surge from that dramaturge, David Parry.
Oh, blue moon, you saw me standing alone, without a dream in my heart, without a love of my own. Oh, good afternoon, Mr. Obitelli, how are you?
That was a really, really good one. I have to give that to you there.
Thank you. Something to do with American Werewolf in London or something years ago, or was it Frank Sinatra? Oh, it all gets so confusing.
Okay, well this week we'll be speaking with filmmaker, writer and investigative journalist Bart Sibrel. Bart is the creator of a movie, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, where he interviews various astronauts from the Apollo missions, including Edd Mitchell, Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong. The film was inspired by footage Bart discovered which he claims proves the moon landings were faked. He also received a punch in the face by Buzz Aldrin for his efforts and is not spoken to too highly in the mainstream media, but we're looking forward to having a chat with him.
This is one of those issues from the conspiracy movement that leaves me, if I'm completely honest, quite cold. In the old days, we used to go on marches, actually during the time of the Apollo program, because they're immoral. You know, all that money was spent on the glorification of America's ego, and forgive me, I know it was heroic if it happened, and I know it was an extraordinary moment for humankind, but there are people starving all over the world, and particularly Africa at that point. World goodwill is shrinking. Warfare is breaking out all over the place. And I just wish we could raise awareness for those issues rather than something which seems to me like a false issue. I'm sorry. So I don't know what I'm going to say during this because I'm more concerned in real life human problems.
Well, yeah, I mean that's a fair argument. I mean, I've heard Edd Mitchell talk about his admission that there's UFO and alien cover-ups. He's come right out into the mainstream and said that, which raises the question that if they did have that sort of technology around the time that they were supposedly shooting rockets up to the moon, then it raises a question that what were they using all that fuel for when they had that free technology? And it kind of asks questions about free energy and that kind of stuff, which I think may help a lot of the poverty that you're talking about. So for me, it's a deep subject, really. I mean, I know the conspiracy theorists love to indulge in a conspiracy for the entertainment value, but some of them have a lot of a big can of worms to open. So believe them or not, you know. It's
sorry, Paul. I see nothing but self-indulgence in this. The world's in a terrible state. Poverty rules the whole globe. I mean, we're on the verge of World War III. I hope it doesn't happen. And what are some people talking about, whether some guys went to the moon or not? We really need to grow up as a species.
Well, I might have to disagree with that because I think any lie, if it is a lie and it's on this mass scale, whatever it is, you're talking about the responsible powers of the world that are doing that, and they're the ones ultimately that can solve all the issues you're talking about. So it's a can of worms, really, and it's a political debate, really. But bring it up to Bart and see what he thinks of it.
More general about the conspiracy movement. I mean, we can't let this lie go, but we can let go the fact there are people starving to death in Africa as we record this podcast.
Oh,
I think
absolutely.
people's values.
but you could address that with anything, couldn't you? I mean, that's the problem with the world when there's so many issues out there.
It's acceptable. It's not. And this distracts attention from real human concerns. I used to say it in those days when we were marching through the cities and being arrested, and I'm saying it now. It's time the human race became more spiritually mature.
Well, yeah, I think that's something that's been needed for a while. But anyway, we've all got an opinion, and right now it's time to go and hear Bart's. Hi there, Bart. Thank you for coming on the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Paul.
That's our pleasure. For me personally, the moon landings is an intriguing subject that I've kind of been interested in for a good few years, because it just seems to be one of these conspiracies that sticks around for a while, and it's, I'll be swayed either side of the argument many times, and it is really intriguing. I understand you kicked off with your first film. Was it Astronauts Gone Wild, your first film?
No, the first film is called The Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. If your listeners go to Sibrel, Sibrel.com, there's a YouTube link, and they can watch the movie. It's about 45 minutes long. It took about 5 years to produce at a cost of $500,000, and it showcases newly discovered footage of fake photography, unedited, from the first mission, proving they never left Earth orbit.
Okay, yeah, and I understand you actually received a right hook on the jaw from Buzz Aldrin as a result of that.
Yeah, after I produced the first film, I had the idea of just asking the astronauts to swear on a Bible whether they walked on the moon or not. And I asked Neil Armstrong, and he started shaking like a leaf. We even offered him $5,000 cash to give to his favorite charity at a price of $1,000 a second, just to say, I swear to God, I walked on the moon. And he refused to do it. I think they're afraid that it could be used as a video deposition in the future. They've never actually taken an oath that they actually walked on the moon, and that's why most of them are afraid to do that.
Oh, right. So basically, you're using that technique as a way to put them in a position that if it did come about that they were being dishonest in the official story, that it was kind of down on record. That's
correct. A lot of sly people in political positions write legislation or various things, kind of vague wording, so that they can, in their mind, technically, be correct, or whatever their excuse is for doing devious things. In the case of Buzz Aldrin, when I confronted him and asked him to swear on the Bible that he walked on the moon, he wouldn't do it. And I called him a coward, a liar, and a thief, because he had just received $2,000 for an hour interview about something he didn't do. And so he got mad, he punched me. And I realized later, I should not have talked to him so disrespectfully. I didn't wake up that morning, intending to call him a coward, a liar, and a thief, and he didn't wake up that morning intending to punch me. Just one of those things that got heated. I later apologized for talking to him disrespectfully and provoking him to anger.
Well, that was going to be one of my questions, because I was going to say, do you have any regrets? Because a lot of people felt that you were a bit in his face and a bit over pressuring in that situation, but you pretty much answered that. So
yeah, I mean, one way of looking at it is people who have eluded justice are subject to being asked questions about their illegal actions and bad behavior. That is a normal course of action. Name calling, though, like I did, I think that's inappropriate, especially to a person older than myself. I need to respectfully, submit my positions to him. And, of course, he should not become violent simply because of words that people speak either. So, I apologize for provoking him. And interestingly enough, the day that I apologized, he ordered a copy of my movie.
Oh, right.
We have a record of it online at his Beverly Hills address at the time. And so I think a lot of the astronauts were pressured into participating in the fake moon landings.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know, but Neil Armstrong was not supposed to be the first man to walk on the moon. It was originally going to be a guy named Virgil Grissom, and he was in the Apollo 1 program, Apollo 1 mission, and they were burned alive, not even firing the rockets. If you imagine, they traveled to another planet 6 times, never got the slightest injury, But here on the ground, when they were just doing radio tests, 3 people die. Why is that? Well, his own wife, who I've spoken to for hours, and his own son, who's a 747 pilot, so the guy's not an idiot. They're both 100% convinced that that fire was set deliberately.
Yeah.
I believe that Gus Grissom was going to not participate in the fake moon landings and was about to expose it. And that's why they murdered him with 2 other people as a warning to get other people to cooperate.
Have you managed
Interestingly,
have you managed to get any interviews with these people as well, like for future footage or?
Well, I have talked to the widow of Virgil Grissom for several hours, as well as his son, and I have not released those interviews because they are pursuing their own legal action to get that case resolved. It was their relative, not mine, their father and husband. At the same time, you have to understand, I have proof that's at the end of my movie. Go to Sibrel, Sibrel.com, and just click on the YouTube link. You can watch this movie for free. You'll see at the end of the movie unedited footage with the second or third track of audio of the CIA talking to them. They're faking a shot right in front of your eyes. So I have proof on one hand that the Apollo missions never left Earth orbit. They have, on the other hand, proof that the Apollo 1 fire was set deliberately.
Right.
Now, don't you think the 2 events are related to one another? Of course they are. I went to the archives and I said, show me just one picture, one still picture, a 35 millimeter, 70 millimeter camera, one picture of Neil Armstrong standing on the surface of the moon, and there's not a single one. Their excuse is that he was taking the pictures. That's why he doesn't appear in any of them. Now, if it's a 500-degree difference Fahrenheit between, the shadows minus 250 and the sunlight plus 250, and there's micrometeorites and all this stuff, and the camera's constantly, having a fluctuating temperature of 500 degrees, I think you might want to have a backup camera of the world's greatest event, second to the Messiah coming, and yet they didn't. Neil Armstrong did not want liability. He did not want pictures of him on the moon. That's why he rarely gave interviews, and he did. The people at the archives were dumbfounded. How come, if Neil Armstrong is so famous, how come we can't find a single still picture? There are TV images, but that's probably not him. And then there's an automatic camera, allegedly a motion picture camera, on the side of the lunar module that shows 2 masked figures. That's probably not him. But as far as a single image from a still camera of him standing on the surface of the moon, I went to the archives personally, and there's not one. He did not want the liability. So something is going on here. It just seems odd to me that, the Wright brothers allegedly did power flight in the early 1900s, and, within months, everyone else was doing powered flight. I mean, when Columbus went to the New World, it was months later that people were going to the New World. When Lewis and Clark went west, months later, people were going west, and yet it's coming up on 50 years, a half a century, that they claim they went to the moon, another planet, 1,000 times farther than the space shuttle goes, with 1960s technology, and they cannot repeat it today. They cannot repeat it 50 years later. The most industrialized nation on Earth, China, says that it's going to take at least 20 years, with 50 years more technology, to put a man on the moon. And yet they claim they went within a 6.5-year goal. Now, that seems a little odd to me. It's just this misdirected patriotism that clouds people's perception of the truth. I mean, I don't know whether O.J. Simpson killed those people or not, but if you were a fan of O.J. Simpson, there was no evidence that could ever be presented that would make people change their mind. They weren't interested in the truth. They loved the tradition and the myth of the guy more than the truth. And that's what's going on today. People, watch a football game and they say, we won. Well, first of all, none of the players are even from your state, to begin with. You weren't on the field. You weren't even in the stadium. And you say, we won. And people who claim to be intellectuals or scientists or in the techno field say, we went to the moon, and you're trying to take that away from them. The interesting thing is that this is really the only conspiracy that was positive. I mean, whoever shot Kennedy, he's dead. Whoever did 9/11, 3,000 people are dead, regardless of who did it. But this is the only positive conspiracy. It made people feel good during the height of the Vietnam War and the Cold War. It gave us something to cheer about. Nixon, who was president at the time, said the protests against the war, the domestic protests against the Vietnam War, were the single greatest security threat to the nation in his mind. So this gave something to cheer about, something to feel good about America. And you're trying to take that away from people. Scientists or intellectuals. I'm talking to a professor at a university, a science professor. And I said, well, what if Neil Armstrong went on national TV and confessed that the moon landings were fake? You know what he said? He said, I still believe we went. Now, how can he really be a truth seeker? He thinks his opinion is more important than a first-hand witness.
Okay, well, before we go into the details on the footage that you were questioning the astronauts about, I'd like to bring up something, because when I was fishing around your name on Google, finding out more about you, I come across conflicting reports. Basically, there was your CVs where talking about your qualifications as a filmmaker and a journalist and so forth, and then obviously you go onto the wiki page and it's kind of a belittling tone, describing you as a taxi driver stroke conspiracy theorist, which sounded a little bit belittling. Not that there's anything wrong with cab drivers to our listeners out there. It's a handy job. But is there anything you'd like to say about that?
Oh, sure. I mean, if they're criticizing the messenger rather than the message, that should tell you that they're completely wrong right there. I mean, this is so odd. I mean, why does anything having to do with whether I'm a filmmaker or not have anything to do with the truth, whether we went to the moon or not? I mean, I started my fifth production company in 2008, right at the moment the economy crashed, and I drove a cab on weekends for extra money. And now they say, well, he's not really a filmmaker, he's a cab driver. Well, I mean, if you go to Sibrel, Sibrel.com, and go to my YouTube channel, you see I've spent millions of dollars on films and equipment. I've received awards for cinematography, editing, director. I mean, I don't know how anybody could say I'm not a filmmaker. I worked at an NBC affiliate in the news department for 2 years, and this NASA critic says, no, I only worked there for 2 months. Well, I mean, I was there through 2 Christmases and 2 Thanksgivings. Why would the guy lie to make his point? If a person is lying to make their point, the point is not valid. And if they cannot criticize the message and they criticize the messenger, then that means the message is valid. They're just proving me right.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't like it when people do that anyway, act as if a cab driver couldn't have anything good to say anyway. You know, I don't like hearing that kind of stuff, so my view on that.
Well, I remember being in the cab driving on a weekend, and I picked up some passengers from this, allegedly upscale restaurant, and they were bragging that important people go to that restaurant. And I was thinking, I didn't say it, I probably should. Everybody's important. God said the meek will inherit the earth. God said how difficult it is for the rich to inherit the kingdom of God. About the Messiah, God, he said he gave up all of his wealth to come down and wash people's feet. So, I mean, what this really boils down to, Paul, biblical name Paul, it's a struggle between light and darkness, between good and evil. Who is the father of lies? It's Satan. I know there are people out there, many more people, professionals believe that 9/11 was a conspiracy. I'm not sure. There's a lot of odd things about it. But the point is, something is wrong with our planet. There's war being done for profit. There's rape, murder, incest, constant lying from officials. It's a struggle between truth and lies. That's all it is. The first sin on planet Earth, the sin of pride was from Satan, but the sin that first took place on planet Earth wasn't even done by humans. It was done by Satan, and it was a lie. Now, here's the interesting thing about a lie. Paul, if I killed you and you have a wife and kids, I mean, there's your dead body, and there's your orphaned kids and widowed wife. If I steal an expensive microphone from you, you can see that. I've got it, you don't. You can't do your show anymore, your microphone's gone, and I just got $2,000 from selling it. But if you lie, where is it? You see, you can see a murder, you can see a theft, but when you lie, where is it? If I told you right now, I have $1 million in diamonds in my right pocket. Now, how would you know whether I'm telling the truth or not? You see, and that sin a lie is the only sin you really can't put your hand around, and that's why it's the most dangerous. And, there are, David, who's coming in later, he's going to point out there's many more important things to worry about, and I'm sure he's absolutely right. At the same time, the moon landing is symbolic because it's the greatest physical accomplishment of mankind. The film opens up with the Tower of Babel, and it says right there in the Bible it was done to boast, to say we can build a taller building than yours. That's still going on today. Then we show the Titanic and a newspaper headline that said the ship that God himself could not sink. We're better than God. That never got finished either. And then Nixon, putting a man on the moon, said it was the greatest event, only second to creation, when he knew they weren't there. I mean, putting a man on the moon is the greatest, allegedly, accomplishment of mankind. Now, here are the two possibilities. Either they went, they planted a flag on a rock, and were able to come back with 1960s technology, and that has a certain level of significance historically to mankind if it's true. But look at the alternative here. If they didn't go, and they lied about it, and they murdered people to keep it a secret, and they embezzled billions of dollars, that is more profound of an event historically than if they actually went. So what we have, because I know after spending $1 million in 10 years of research and going from being the biggest fan to the biggest critic, we know they didn't go. So what we have is one of the greatest events in human history is the shaking of the moon landing out of pride and greed and deceit. And no one knows this great truth. It's being hidden from mankind. We cannot grow forward as a species, a spiritual being, unless we learn from our mistakes. And they are hoarding this minority of minorities who manipulate the world. They know we didn't go to the moon, and they don't want the rest of us because it unveils their whole control over the earth.
Okay, well, I mean, you're obviously very passionate about it, and there's a lot of, it's been one of them things. There's been a lot of people that will be listening now thinking this guy's spot on, and there's a lot of people that want to do a Buzz Aldrin on you. Again, they're out there. Could you sort of talk to us about the actual footage that you had when you were talking about the window, and you said that you're basically claiming that they were lying about how far away they were from the Earth, and that footage, because that was quite interesting.
Sure. Let me give you a little background. I grew up with my dad in the Air Force, and I was 4 years old to sleep in bed when they allegedly walked on the moon. He got this, very expensive VIP package of photographs of men on the moon. I put it up on my bedroom wall and had it up there from age 4 to 14. I saw pictures of men on the moon 365 days a year for 10 years. That means I looked at the pictures 3,650 times. Then when I'm 14 years old, I'm flipping the channels, and I see this TV program on of a guy who worked for NASA for 6.5 years during the time of Apollo, and he said they didn't go. I'm like, oh, well, I'm open-minded. Fortunately, as a 14-year-old, I go, well, maybe that's true. Let me take a look at these pictures. And sure enough, my eyes were wide shut. I was looking at all this evidence of them being fake, but I never saw it. And 10 years went by, I became a filmmaker, and I was actually editing a film one day for the guy who had produced the program I saw as a 14-year-old. And I'm like, well, what about that? Where's that guy who said we didn't go to the moon? Well, he put me in touch with him. He said, well, Bart, you should do a film about this. So I'm a pretty relentless personality. I love puzzles. And I thought, well, this is just a puzzle. And I'm a filmmaker. My job is to make fake scenes look real. I've had other colleagues say, boy, that's a beautiful sunset you had in that shot. And I said, well, that's actually an electrical light. I fooled you. And so after 6 months of research, the shadow's not looking right, the lighting not looking right, the behavior, the administrator of NASA resigned days before the first Apollo mission. That should tell you something. Astronauts, their weird behavior. If I really walked on the moon and someone thought otherwise, I would find that hysterical. Why would I get angry? The point is, if I walked up to a man in front of his wife and said, well, how's your girlfriend doing? Then he would punch me because he would be angry that I exposed him. He's angry because it's the truth. Well, I started producing this film under the theory it might be true. I said, with all the evidence so far, there's at least a 1 out of 4 chance they didn't go to the moon. So 3.5 years into this 5-year project, we bought lots of documentation from the widows of the astronaut estates, behind-the-scenes documentation about how they could not go to the moon and various things like that. I said, we don't know. I'm going to do the film under the theory it might be true. I asked for all of these photographs and all of these reels. No one had ever asked for everything. And I said, just from the first mission, I figured if they faked it, they're more likely to have made a mistake the first time they faked it, because they'd never faked it before. Well, I'm going through this footage. Bill says someone at NASA secretly sent me this information. Now, what was on the label of the film reel and what was the content were completely different. Maybe that was the way of disguising it. So I popped in this reel of footage, and it says, first thing on the screen, do not show to the public in big letters. I'm like, oh, okay, this should be interesting. And I had asked for unedited footage, and I got none of it. Everything was already sanitized and put together in the way they wanted. Well, I pop it in, I hit fast forward, I'm seeing the same shot for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 60 minutes. I'm like, what is this? It's just this little blue Earth, with black around it. It's supposed to be the Earth floating in space, shot out the window to show they're far away from the Earth, halfway to the moon, as they're supposed to be at this segment in the mission. It's actually the only fake footage that the astronauts actually filmed themselves. They were on the rocket. They went up. They had to be. They had to go up in front of witnesses. They had to later splash down in front of witnesses. And when they're in Earth orbit, they can get real zero gravity, the tuna can floating around and things like that, which is very difficult to fake. But this tape proved they never left Earth orbit. Now, they only aired about 10 to 20 seconds of this footage, but I have the hour of them rigging this shot over and over again, trying to get it right. If you can imagine a black, TV screen with a little blue ball in the middle of it, maybe taking up about 20% of it, that's supposed to be the Earth in space with, all this distance around it. They say they're halfway to the moon at this point in the footage. Neil Armstrong says we're calling in from about 135,000 miles out, which is about halfway to the moon. So they say there's only one window that faces the Earth, and it's filled up with this big TV camera back then, and they have basically the lens at the window's glass to shoot this Earth some distance away. That's how they explain they're getting the footage. But because we have the unedited footage, we see all of this is a lie. The camera is actually at the very back of the spacecraft, which is coupled in kind of a tubular form, so they're at least 10 to 15 feet back away from the window. They've turned out all of the lights and blocked the sunlight coming in so that the interior of the spacecraft will be dark, all of which they talk about openly because they thought these conversations would be edited out. They even say this is for playback later, even though they claimed at the time that it was broadcast live. Then what they did is, because they're in Earth orbit, they cannot leave Earth orbit because of lethal radiation. They have part of the Earth outside a circular window. Some believe it was just backlit by the Earth's shine, and they put a transparency, shot from an unmanned probe of the Earth. But either way, it's about a 1-foot model of the Earth. There's even a third track of audio of the CIA. Now, after I produced the film, I realized my interpretation of this third track was a little bit better later on. Basically, they're supposed to be halfway to the moon at this point, 130,000 miles away from the Earth. Now, but they're really in Earth orbit about 200 miles above the Earth. So, according to the speed of light and the old equipment that these radio signals had to go through, it would take at least 2 seconds for the transmission from NASA to reach the astronauts, and about 2 seconds or more for it to come back. So when NASA says at the beginning, hey, the TV picture looks great, there's exactly 4 seconds of dead air, 1,001, 2, 3, 4, and then on a third track of audio with a completely different EQ than NASA or the astronauts, we hear someone right on top of a microphone say, talk. And then Neil Armstrong starts speaking. Now, according to NASA, there's only 2 people on this channel, the astronauts and NASA. But obviously, there's a third party. Wherever this tape is being recorded, it's not even going through a radio EQ. It's crystal clear. And basically, Neil Armstrong had an earpiece in that this third channel, probably from the CIA, who was privately talking to him. Had he responded immediately, it would have given away the fact that he was really close to the Earth, only 200 miles above it. So in order to create the effect of an increased radio delay, someone at the CIA had a stopwatch, and after NASA said The TV picture looks great. They counted off 4 seconds, and then they said, talk. And Neil Armstrong speaks. They accidentally left that audio track on it. Now, there's a company called Spacecraft Films, which is actually part of NASA. It's a subsidiary of them through the NSA or whoever, but in any case, they released part of this footage to discredit me, saying, hey, it's not secret footage, we're going to release some of it. Well, they released this segment, this opening segment that I just described, except they removed talk. They edited it out. So in an attempt to disprove that this proves they didn't go to the moon, they're actually proving me right because they edited out the proof that proves that it's fraudulent in their attempt to prove that it's not fraudulent. They actually edited out the track of audio of the CIA prompting Neil Armstrong to speak 4 seconds after he heard the answer. People don't realize that the space shuttle and the space station is only 200 miles above the Earth. That's about 300 kilometers away. So pick a distance between you, and that's 200 miles or 300 kilometers away. That's as far as they go. If you had a 1-foot globe, that'd be about a half an inch or less above the globe. The moon is 30 globes away. It's 1,000 times farther than the moon. Now, if we can only go
interrupt you,
200 miles...
Just to interrupt you before, just to pause here before you go on, have you actually got is there actually evidence that you've got two versions of the footage that you discovered and the original footage that was supposedly just left for people to see? Could you actually prove that yourself?
Oh, absolutely. All you got to do is go to Sibrel, Sibrel.com, click on the YouTube link, click on A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, watch the movie, and then go to Spacecraft Films and order, the duplicate footage, allegedly, and you'll see their version has talk edited out, and my version has talk in it.
So your version was the first. Your version was the first, was it? The first version.
Correct. I have the unedited reel that someone at NASA, according to Bill Casey, who wanted to expose the truth, sent it to me, and it proves that you got to imagine, Paul. When I pop in this footage, I only think it's a 1 out of 4 possibility that the moon landings are fake at this point. I pop in the footage, I hit play, and it finally dawns on me. Wait a minute, they're faking being halfway to the moon. And I'm thinking, well, what does that mean? They're faking being halfway. Well, it means they didn't go halfway, okay? If they didn't go halfway, they certainly can't go all the way. And if they're faking any of the mission, that means it's not fake. I mean, that means it's not real. It's all fake. And because they had identical equipment, if you have a 1965 Volkswagen Bug and it can't go 500 miles an hour, it means none of them can. And if the first mission's equipment can't go to the moon as the tape proves, it means they never went. It means the moon landings are fake. It's dawning on me as I'm watching this footage and I say, oh my God, they really didn't go to the moon. I must have said, oh my God, about 100 times in 2 minutes.
You're basically saying that they went out just outside the Earth's atmosphere or just a bit further out and then basically just stuck around there while people thought they were going to the moon. They kind of just hang about outside there. Is that what you're claiming? Or?
Yeah, they went no further than the space shuttle or the space station goes. They had to go up in front of witnesses, right? They had to splash down in front of witnesses, and they had to get zero gravity footage with the equipment in the background, which they got by going into Earth orbit. The way you would fake it is you would do as much as you could do realistically. For example, let's say they could land on the moon, but for whatever reason the spacesuits didn't work, they couldn't get out, and you would have gone and faked it up to that point. Let's say they could have orbited the moon but not landed. They would have done a real lunar orbit to get that real footage. But they're faking being halfway to the moon. That means they cannot leave Earth orbit, and you find out it's because of the Van Allen radiation belt, which doesn't start until 1,000 miles up, and it's 25,000 miles thick. When George Bush Jr. said we need to return to the moon as a logical first step to Mars and beyond. Now, get this, they've allegedly went to the moon 6 times, and George Bush, when he was president, said we have to return to the moon in order to go to Mars because it's a logical first step to going to Mars. And then he says, but before we do that, we have to learn how to protect the astronauts from lethal space radiation. Well, I'm thinking, well, why not do it just the great way that worked for the Apollo missions? But he didn't say that. He said we had to return to the moon in order to learn how to go to Mars. Well, we already did it. Why would you go from a bicycle to a tricycle in an attempt to go to a unicycle? That doesn't make any sense.
Okay, well, one thing I wanted to ask before I ask Dave to chip in with some thoughts. What about Russia? Because, I mean, you say they're hanging around outside the Earth and just sort of, I don't know, having a bit of a party there while while people think they're going to the moon. Wouldn't have Russia have said, hang on, everyone, look, we can spot them. This is where they are. You know, they're lying kind of thing. Why didn't Russia sort of stick their noses into this?
Well, Russia originally, during the first moon landing, there's one story you can find that one ambassador from Russia said it was fake, and he was told never to repeat that statement. Apparently, there are backdoor deals going on. For example, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, part of the negotiation to the Soviets to take their bases out of Cuba was that the United States would take nuclear bases out of Turkey. Now, Kennedy never admitted that. That came out decades later, that was a negotiation. He wanted to save face domestically. The Soviets didn't care. They said, as long as you remove them, you can tell your people or not tell your people, we don't care. The Soviets know the moon landings are fake. Israel knows. China knows. Japan knows. But they are using this as a negotiating tool. For example, if I had a picture of the president with a prostitute, I could just give that free to the media and ruin him. Or I could blackmail him year after year for millions and millions and millions of dollars. And the smart thing for these governments to do is to blackmail the United States with this information rather than expose it. They certainly do know.
Well, I guess if that is true, then it wouldn't be out of the question that there's a few other stories that maybe America have got up their sleeve as well. Who knows, who knows what these people know. But I think we need to... David, are you here taking all this in?
Very, very interesting indeed. I'll make one confession. The Van Allen belt thing has always worried me as well. It seems very difficult to go beyond that and not sort of just fry. That caught my attention a great deal. Look, before I start talking to Bart, I need to lay some cards on the table, not only to our good guest, but to our listeners. Free thought and open minds is what started this podcast. Paul and I hold to those values, and what we like doing is giving interesting people the chance to present their own views, and we're never holding back from that. I must admit, I'm warming to Bart a great deal. He's a man of passion. No one should be hounded. I saw enough of the footage and read enough to know that. I also rather like radical investigators. I suspect we need more of them and not less. Also, America. The very best of us Europeans, went to America as colonists and pilgrim fathers to settle it. So that's on my mind a great deal at the moment. Let me begin with something technical, Bart, before I get more into sort of what's concerning me about these questions and these subjects. There is something in philosophy called epistemology. I tend to be what they call an epistemological skeptic to an extent. How do we know what we know? And I rather like taxi drivers. I'll tell you what's on my mind there. Bertrand Russell had a series of conversations with taxi drivers when he was at the height of his powers, and the conversation would always end up with, how do you know what you know? I mean, he'd say things like, well, how do you know the world didn't come into existence 5 minutes ago with all your memories intact? How do you know that? And my first point, I suppose, is how do we know that we know anything? Why are you so convinced that your take on this is the true one? What do you think, Bart?
Well, that's an excellent question. I would say because of my conversion. I mean, I went from being the biggest fan of the moon mission, having 20 pictures on my wall approximately, seeing them for nearly 4,000 times before I ever even questioned the authenticity of the moon mission. So, I mean, I would say that conversion speaks for itself. If I went from being the biggest fan to the biggest critic, I am a truth seeker. That's all. I'm just interested in the truth. To me, the world is a competition between lies and the truth for our hearts, souls, and minds, and it's all about truth or lies. Now, you're right from what we said privately, before we started recording, that there are bigger fish to fry in the world than whether we went to the moon or not. And in and of itself, you're absolutely correct. At the same time, it's my hope and my passion is if the truth came out. Here's my fantasy, David. If the truth came out, let's say Obama went on national TV, holding back tears and said, it just came to light. I've been a big fan of the moon missions, and I'm so heartbroken to find out that they were falsified by the Nixon administration. You can blame the Republicans or whoever, and I just want to apologize on behalf of the government. We're going to send everybody a check for $800, which is how much it costs every man, woman, and child. And we're going to reform the government and have more truth, and we're going to put an end to this. Would that be a good thing? I think it'd be a wonderful thing. Imagine Buzz Aldrin on national TV doing the same thing, confessing the moon landings are fake. I'm sorry. I have to clear my conscience before I die. Would that be a good thing or not? Of course it would be a good thing. Now it's messy. Let's say you have a boil, on your leg, and you have to lance it. Now it's messy. But do you want gangrene to grow on your leg? Sometimes a doctor says to a person, I'm going to have to cut off your leg in order for you to live.
But don't get me wrong.
So be it.
You speak strongly, and I think you spoke very well about why this issue may have more significance than people realize. I thought you spoke very well about that. But as I say, my background is sort of Quaker, Free Church, and I am concerned. Truth is everything. Truth is one of the divine titles. Truth is everything. And let me tell our listeners what we were talking about. I used to go on marches way back when, and we used to worry a great deal about poverty and world starvation and the lack of goodwill and the fact there's not enough peace. I mean, there's a war brewing at the moment. I hope not, because it can still be diverted. And it breaks my heart to this day that we couldn't raise enough coverage to really cover the back of a stamp in those days. And I suspect the same is going on now. Children in Africa, across the third world, are starving to death as we speak. Why isn't that a bigger issue?
Well, it should be a bigger issue. For example, in the news, I don't remember how long ago it was, 10 years ago, some airplane they were all from Switzerland or something, and they had diamonds and Picassos on board or something. And they went on and on for weeks about these poor, and they were, poor in spirit, 233 people, or however many it was, who died. But they failed to report that 30,000 children die every day because of starvation. Now, here's how the moon landing is tied into that. If the truth came out about the most symbolic lie, the biggest, the grandest lie, perhaps, then it could open the door to all these other truths being exposed about starvation, about children, about war for profit, about all these things. It's the poster child of lying. So if we can expose the poster child of the lie, even though really it didn't kill anyone aside from a few people who knew the secret, then it could potentially open the floodgates for all of these other lies to come out.
My dear friend, that's very interesting. What was it? The People of the Lie, Scott Peck, a remarkable book. I'm assuming you're a Christian?
I try really hard to be. Yes.
That's the perfect answer. I'll tell you why I'm asking that. I mean, I have been told by friends of mine, I'm not part of the conspiracy set. I mean, that's Paul much more than me. I'm sympathetic. I'm not part of the truth movement, but again, I'm sympathetic. Have you heard of Project Paperclip? Do you think, I mean, I was absolutely shocked a couple of years ago where very, very respected men, friends of mine, I was actually just about to say their names, that's not allowed, from very high positions in the BBC, I can say that bit, showed me pictures of Werner von Braun at NASA. I was absolutely shocked when I saw them. But do you think that is involved and it's something to do with the subterfuge that you're detecting?
Oh, absolutely. There's an interview, and I wish I could remember the film. It might be Paper Moon, or why do you call it a paper moon, or was it only a paper moon? there's some moon film out there about the moon landings being fake, and they have an on-camera interview with someone from the State Department in the United States, and he says that von Braun was about to be prosecuted as a war criminal in the early 1970s. He died, so they dropped the case, but he was about to be prosecuted. Yeah, von Braun was the chief scientist of the Apollo program. He was a Nazi. He apparently ran a camp building, V2 rockets where he, was responsible for torturing and killing lots of people. So that's who the man is, apparently. I don't know for sure. He's not here to defend himself, but that's what I have heard. And now he's in charge of the moon program. It was Hitler, his boss, his mentor, who said, people tell small lies all the time, so everyone's got their radar up for those. But the big lie, that's the one you can easily fool people with, because most people think no one would be so audacious. I ask people, well, why would you not believe the moon landings might even possibly be fake? They said, well, no one would do such a thing. No one would do it on national TV and hold ticker tape parades for this people. People aren't that evil. And I said, you mean people who rape children? They'll do that, but they won't fake a TV program? And so here's another tie-in most people don't know about. The Apollo 1 fire, let's go back to that. I bought for $10,000 the Apollo 1 accident report. Now, they call it, technically, I think it's the Apollo 101 fire or 102 fire or 301. They didn't call it in the congressional record the Apollo 1 fire accident report. I think they called it like the Apollo 201 or something. They did that so technically it's not classified, but you can never find it because you're looking at the wrong number. So we paid $10,000 from Roger Chaffee's widow for the copy of the report that she got, and I read it. It's like 350 pages, and basically it proves that the astronauts did not die because of the fire. They died because of cyanide poisoning. That's why they don't want people to find this in the archives, and yet they're not allowed to consider it classified. That's why they misnumbered it deliberately so people couldn't find it. The guys smelled smoke. They were told to stay put. They were buckled in, just as if they were doing a real launch. When they removed their corpses from the burned capsule, again, this is a guy, Virgil Gus Grissom, who days earlier was complaining up the chain of command how they were decades away from going to the moon, not years. And he hung a lemon the size of a grapefruit on the top of the rocket, invited the media in without permission to take a picture. He called the thing a lemon. This is the guy they were going to trust to fake the moon landing, to use the media to go over their heads to proclaim the truth to the world. Well, when they removed their bodies from the capsule, they were buckled in. They were all buckled in. Now, when you smell smoke and see a flame, the very first thing you're going to do is unbuckle your safety belt to get out of there. But they were buckled in. That means they were dead before the fire. There was cyanide gas. There was a dip in the electrical current right before the fire. That dip, I believe, and so does the widow and son of the dead astronaut, believe there was some sort of device, alligator clamped into the wiring, that had a cyanide capsule in it that went into water. That dip in the power was when that was triggered, probably by radio. And then they used the fire as a method of getting rid of the forensic evidence of gassing people. Now, let's get back to von Braun. Weren't the Nazis really good at gassing people? And so he came up with this brilliant idea, apparently, to gas the astronauts, because they were afraid if they tried to kill them with a fire, they might actually get out and survive. So we want to make sure they're dead. So they killed them with the gas. Then they started the fire with the second device, really to get rid of the forensic evidence. And that's why they were buckled in when they removed their corpses, because they were dead before the fire. It's proven in the Apollo 1 accident report. And von Braun, right there, in charge of the whole thing. And it's amazing that he was about to be indicted for war crimes, but he predeceased them, and so they couldn't do it. Think about this. Johnson there's only two presidents in the history of America who were incumbents who had the right to run for re-election who chose not to. And one of those is Johnson. Johnson, because he served that term for the end of Kennedy's first term, that didn't count as a term. So he could have run for re-election in 1968, and he chose not to. Where's he from? Texas. What's in Texas? Eastern Control. What were they about to do? Fake the moon landing. Now, who knew that would work? Maybe it would work. Maybe you'd get caught. That would be a terrible way to go down in history books, wouldn't it? As the president who got caught faking the moon landing. What a great legacy that would be. He didn't want to have anything to do with that. That's why he didn't run for re-election.
But my friend, you know my opinion because I've spoken to you as a new friend and as a fellow believer. I still think there are much bigger issues, but let me say you're a fascinating man and you've got me intrigued. Paul, the floor is yours.
Have you spoken to any of the astronauts since you had your little confrontation with them all at all or anything?
Well, for mutual security, I cannot discuss that. I can tell you I've had private conversations with them, and there are astronauts who regret their participation. I can tell you, and I've spoken it before, there are astronauts who have told me face-to-face, eye-to-eye, in the same room that I am correct. Now, we'll take it from there. I have to be very careful because here's what happened when Bill Casey was doing this investigation. In 1991, I've been hounding, if you will, the astronauts, which, I have no plans to do any more in the future, but that was as best as I was doing at that time. You can imagine my surprise if I get a call coming in and I look at the ID and it's like, oh, it's Buzz Aldrin calling me. Hold on a second. So you can imagine Bill Casey, who did the initial investigation. He wrote a book, We Never Went to the Moon. He was one of the first guests on Oprah discussing the moon landings being fake in the 80s. You can imagine his surprise when in August of 1991, he gets a phone call from one of the astronauts, James Irwin, Apollo 15. James Irwin tells him he recently became a born-again Christian and that they need to have a serious talk about the contents of his book. He expresses concern for his security, and he says, Bill, why don't you give me a call at this number 3 days from now? 3 days later, the astronaut had a fatal heart attack. You see, somebody was monitoring somebody's phone calls, Bill, the astronaut, both, who knows, and these astronauts are in danger. They know everything. I've got the hem of the garment. They know everything. How it was done, where it was done, why it was done. Their eyewitness testimony to it.
Well, Edd Mitchell has come out basically for a while now saying that there's UFOs and alien cover-ups, or not claiming outright, but pretty much saying he's pretty sure that that's all going on. Which for me, it makes me, if he's sympathetic to those kind of conspiracies, that opens a whole new can of worms, because if UFOs did exist around that time, that the moon landings, then obviously they didn't need to even use fuel back then anyway. They had an alternative energy. So that's a whole different subject, isn't it? And what are your views on UFOs being around at that time?
Well, there's something else. If your listeners go to Sibrel, Sibrel.com, there's a link for Conspiracy Corner. Go there, and there's a link. Are there aliens? There's a story I wrote. Are there aliens from outer space?
Yeah.
Now, Edd Mitchell, who says the moon landings are real, also says aliens are real. That should tell you something right there. The guy says, I don't hit people when I confronted him, and 5 seconds later, he hit me. You know what I mean? He comes across as this guru, peace guru, and then we accidentally left the wireless microphone on him. The camera was recording still accidentally in the back of the seat of the rental car in Florida, and we hear him and his son saying they're considering calling the CIA to have me executed, which is in the movie Astronauts Gone Wild. Now, if the guy says the moon landings are real when they're not, and he says aliens are real, what should that tell you? There's a link at the end of this article. It just came out a couple of weeks ago that the United States has admitted that they've been faking UFO sightings deliberately to deceive people. Now, for those Christians out there, there's a scripture I found in Revelation 21:3. It says that when God makes the new heaven and the new earth after the return of the Messiah, he will personally dwell with mankind. Now, the Bible says that God does not show partiality. So if there's life on all these other planets, and he dwells with us and not them, then he's showing partiality. So the only way he could dwell with us and still not show partiality is if we're it. There's a great book out there called Privileged Planet, and another one Cosmos Under God. And it says not only is the Earth the right distance from the sun and tilted the right way, it gets down to the DNA atomic level and the amount of gravity. They said everything has to be so perfect. If you really look into science, it's actually proof of a creator, because otherwise you're saying that the odds of this happening accidentally are like winning the Powerball lottery 40 times in a row, which is impossible, which means we shouldn't even exist. It's probably the opposite of the truth to say that there's life out there. Now, that NASA knows this. There's a UFO community who realizes that the moon landing pictures are fake. That they plant the seed, well, that's because there are alien bases on the other side of the moon and blah, 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 blah. They don't care why you believe the moon landings are real, only that you do. Now, it's a possibility that, in fact, the top two UFO researchers, they're in my article, I can't remember their name. One guy is French and one guy is somewhere else in there. They've been doing UFO research and Edd research for decades. They both concluded very recently that these UFOs are happening, but they are not from another planet. They are from Earth. That is their both mutual conclusion. And now they are banned from the UFO community because the UFO wants to believe in Star Trek and the League of Planets or whatever this fantasy is. The top UFO researchers say the UFO, it is a phenomenon, it is something, but it's not from another planet. They both concluded that very recently before they retired. That means it's from Earth. Some people believe it's fallen angels pretending to be extraterrestrials. Obviously, they are liars. Satan is the father of lies, and if they're fallen angels, they're liars. They're not going to say, hey, you know what, we're really fallen angels. Because what does that mean? It means the Bible is true, God is true, which means you have to repent of your sin. The money made off of sin is so great. It's, trillions and trillions of dollars daily is made off of sin. So they say, no, we're from, this far galaxy that could never be proven. Some people think there's going to be a fake alien invasion in the future. I would say if there's anything of investigation that I think is worthy, also on Conspiracy Corner, which is through the sleuth journal, Sibrel.com, there's an article about Planet X. Planet X, if you want to talk about, David, something that's relevant that might threaten mankind, apparently there's a possibility that there's this elliptical orbit of a distant planet that loops around the Earth, or loops around the sun ever so often, centuries or millennia, no one knows for sure, and that's due for a close pass to Earth in the near future. That's why the governments and all these executive orders have to do with, what to do in the event of an emergency. In fact, Janet Napolitano, the day she resigned, just like Eisenhower's famous, industrial complex warning the day he resigned, she said, I'm quoting her almost word for word, a natural disaster, the likes of which the United States has never before seen, is likely on its way. Well, what have we seen? We've seen volcanoes, we've seen hurricanes, we've seen earthquakes, but we have not seen, in modern times, comets, asteroids, things like that from outer space affecting life on Earth. That has to be what she's talking about. So now, one last thing. You could tie the two together. If Planet X shows up and suddenly aliens from outer space show up, they're going to claim it came from Planet X. Now, I believe if Planet X exists, it's a completely dead world, just like Jupiter. But it's a great misdirection. The magician holds his hand in front of you while he's doing something from behind his back. The Vatican has a telescope called Lucifer. It's an acronym for something, the most powerful telescope on the planet, and their Jesuit priest told a source of mine that they are tracking an object that will have significant historical importance in the very near future. That is called the fiery red dragon. It causes destruction on the earth. It's God's instrument to bring about the tribulation, some believe. And then it can be used by fallen angels to say, hey, look, we come from this, world that's suddenly appearing in the sky. We're aliens from that planet, when that's not true at all. Now, all that might discredit me completely, but I don't know this for sure. I'm just saying these are relevant things that I'm investigating. You can read on Conspiracy Corner, and they do potentially have something to do with aliens and whether aliens are real or not. They've been planting that seed. I mean, I was in a hotel room recently. 3 of the 10 movies that were on HBO, there were only 10, 3 of them were about aliens from outer space. Now, if 3 of the films were about how great Obama is, or 3 of the films were about how terrible Obama is, I would say someone's trying to manipulate our minds, right? So if 3 of the 10 movies on there are about aliens from outer space, and the liar, Edd Mitchell, wants us to believe in them, don't believe in them, because too many people want you to believe in them. You say, be careful.
Yeah, well, it seems like there's lots more to talk about, but we are pretty much out of time. David, is there anything you'd like to quickly add before we wrap it up very quickly?
Oh, not really. I mean, one of our guests on this show was the Reverend Jim Wilhelmsen, and I disagree with him on so much, but he's a treasure of a man, rather like yourself, Bart. No, I think we need another chat with you at some point if you'd be kind and agreeable, but no, I've nothing further to add today, Paul.
Okay, well, that's we really appreciate you coming on, Bart, and as David says, it would be great to get you back on in the future if you've got some more bits and pieces to talk to us about.
No problem. Believe it or not, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. It's just a fact they didn't go to the moon, and I made a film about it, and I'm the alleged expert because that's been my area of research for more than a decade. It's not really... Half of all crimes are conspiracies. Half are done in the fit of passion, and half are planned in advance. That means conspiracy. The word conspiracy is throughout the Bible. It's thousands of years old. The fact is, the moon landings are fake. I guess they had to conspire to do it. So be it.
Yeah. Well, okay. You've certainly made your case, and I have to say, much of it is very compelling. Marcus Allen's coming on later on in the week to also talk to us about the moon landings. He's another fine man who's done a lot of research on this as well, so he'll be adding to the debate, so you might want to tune in and check that out yourself and have a listen to that one. Thanks for coming on, and we wish you luck with all your work and research.
Well, thank you, Paul and David. Good to talk to you both.
Bart Sibrel, Sibrel.com. If you want to check out his YouTube channel and Conspiracy Corner and his writings there, all the information, just go there and check him out. David, what do you think?
Oh, gosh, what was it? One of Big Willie Shakespeare's sonnets. That mortal moon hath her eclipse endured, and the sad augurs mock their own presage. Fascinating. That with all due respect to him, he knows what I think, you know what I think.
Yeah.
Why can't we focus on real human problems in a tragic world which is grossly unfair and could be made so much better if we put our minds to it? That's what I've got against all of this.
Yeah, I mean, I do see where you're coming from. But I mean, it all depends on what a lie can do, because the world is affected by everything, really. So I do agree. I mean, in the conspiracy world, you do get a lot of people that just want it just for a bit of fun, because it's fun checking out and creating conspiracies and that. But it's also sometimes, I think, it's important that some of these conspiracies, if they were carried out, they could have very sinister intentions for the future of the world. And like you say, people suffering in Africa. I mean, if these people that are ruling in the West are capable and would actually carry out such a big lie, mass scale, then what else are they capable of? Because there's a lot of conspiracies in Africa as well as to why they are suffering so much, not just from the Western government, from their own governments as well. So it really is a big can of worms. But I do see what you're saying. I think in the conspiracy movement, you do get a lot. It does turn into entertainment sometimes. But I thought Bart had some very interesting points. So I have to say, I am suspicious of the moon landing. So I wouldn't go so far as to claim everything that he's claimed. But I think there's definitely a case there for investigation. I do.
Well, I think it's wise at this stage to remind our listeners that we do not on this show support or vindicate any of the opinions that are aired. We give our speakers, our guests, who are most honoured and welcome, the freedom to give their own opinions. We do not endorse them in any way. All I will say is that I'm absolutely certain the powers that be are more than capable of adding to the lie of the worlds when they want to. And I did say lie of the worlds. How much of history is actually true? How much is written by the victors of a war? How often have the nasty bits, or maybe even the holy bits, been secretively removed or rewritten out of the whole narrative because that doesn't suit the agenda? I've no doubt that goes on. But there we are, mate.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. And just to add as well, we're not casting a negative view personally on the astronauts involved in the Apollo missions. I don't know what really happened. We can speculate. The fact is, these claims are out there, which is why we're addressing them. And if we're privileged enough to have one of them on our show, we'd be more than happy to let them speak and air their views and make them feel very home on the show as well. So it's not a vendetta against anyone. It's just interesting information. It's out there. People are talking about it, and so it's on our show. So just to let that be known.
Which one was the UFO guy again?
Well, Edd Mitchell's come out and said he believes there's something fishy regarding the UFO and alien subject. Cooper as well, I think, reported seeing. He reported seeing some flying saucers that he thought were very, very strange indeed. So, but then again, this is another subject because, as I say, Bart believes that's a conspiracy as well, which is when conspiracies get fun, because then that's another argument. Is it, are UFOs and aliens real? Are they not? That's another can of worms, that one.
Dr. Mitchell, please take this as an invite. We need to talk to you.
Okay, well, coming up, we've got Marcus Allen on the show. We'll be chatting more about the moon landings. He's also the publisher for Nexus magazine in the UK. We have Neil Pitt coming up on the show. He's going to talk about the New World Order in a favourable stance, which should be quite interesting and potentially controversial. Let's say controversial. Also, we've got that Jonathan Zapp interview will be coming up, and lots more. We'll also be getting Courtney Brown back on the show, coming on to talk to us about the new Farsight project on 9/11, which should be really interesting because a lot of people wanted to see them start doing projects like on controversial things like that, and they've gone ahead and done it, it seems. So we'll really be looking forward to that one.
Didn't he do something on Jesus recently?
Not that I know of.
There was something flying around anyway. There we are.
Not I know of, but anyway, thanks for tuning in, folks. Hope you enjoyed the show, and I hope you'd be tuning in for the next one. Please link the show, tell your friends about it, and we shall see you next time.
Chowsy, chowsy.